Some 20 months ago or so, an interdisciplinary group of staff, faculty, students, and community members came together to form the planning committee to bring Undesign the Redline to Barnard. Our first meeting coincided with a campus shutdown at the start of what became a global pandemic. Our vision adapted to remote life, and we formed a learning community. Through our reading group, we expanded far beyond our campus. This fall, we opened the Undesign the Redline exhibition in the Milstein Center on campus after months of planning and preparation, which brings us to today. So let me give you the rundown. We will hear from artists, researchers, writers, practitioners, and community members as they boldly share their work, expertise, and experiences with us. The full program, along with the participants' bios, will be posted in the chat. This evening, we will welcome the brilliant Peggy Shepard from We Act. And for our keynote celebration, she will be speaking this evening. If you haven't had a chance to register for that, I'll also post those links in the chat. A huge part of our practice in this project has been to explore land acknowledgements as a way to connect with historical legacies of displacement that shape our ongoing struggles in the present. The legacies of displacement in our ongoing struggles in the present. I'd like to invite Vanessa Till to read the land acknowledgement she prepared for today.
Thank you, Mary. So welcome to Undesign the Redline at Barnard Symposium. My name is Vanessa Till. I'm an alumna of Barnard College and the exhibits designer at the Milstein. Today, we would like to start the day's event with a land acknowledgement. Everyone, please get settled in your seat. Plant your legs firmly on the ground or feel your weight being supported. Think of the ways that this land has supported life over centuries. Barnard's campus is situated on the island of Mannahatta in Lenape-Hoking, the homeland of the Lenape peoples, which spans from Western Connecticut to Eastern Pennsylvania, from the Hudson Valley to Delaware. Due to the violence of colonialism perpetuated by genocide and forced displacement, today the Lenape diaspora is dispersed throughout the US and Canada. As part of this land acknowledgement, I'd also like to acknowledge the stolen Indigenous African peoples whose forced labor built many of the foundations we stand on. Indigenous and Black dispossession, exploitation, and genocide do not exist in a past tense, but neither does the fortitude of those who resist, uphold, and rebuild connections to the land and one another. I'd like to point you to the Nanticoke Lenni Lenape tribal nation, who contributed an excerpt of their history to the Undesign exhibition, which you can read in the lobby here at the Milstein Center. The full text you can find on their website, which I'm sharing in the chat now. There you can also find an opportunity to become an official friend of the tribe by donating to support their efforts. If you're calling in from a different area, I encourage you to explore the history of the land that you are living on. And I'd also like to thank Hannah and Annabelle from the Center for Engaged Pedagogy, who recently hosted a workshop exploring the critical practice of land acknowledgements. They illuminated the importance as well as limitations of such statements and asked us to consider what we can do beyond the acknowledgement. And before I turn it over to our first panel, our presenters, I have another important acknowledgement, which goes to the Columbia Student Workers Union, who are currently on strike. They are demanding a fair contract that includes a living wage, better health care, union recognition for all student workers, and protections from sexual harassment. They recognize Columbia as a predatory and vastly profitable real estate entity whose actions have negatively impacted students, workers, and our Harlem neighbors in various interrelated ways. For these reasons, they have just launched a rent strike. And the urgency of this strike has been informed by the university's decision to change their compensation system during the summer. So there's an urgent need for support for their strike fund, which I'm also sharing a link to. So please check them out for upcoming teach-ins that connect worker struggle to tenant struggles. And with that, I will hand it over to Miriam Neptune.
Thank you, Vanessa. Excuse me. So I want to also join Vanessa and Mary in welcoming all of you and thanking you for being here this morning. I'll try to speak quickly in the interest of time. As you know, if you've been able to view the Undesign the Redline exhibit, which we are currently hosting at Barnard's Milstein Center, the exhibit walks us through the documentation that we need to understand a system of structural inequality that was solidified during the New Deal but continues today. The exhibit emphasizes the importance of seeing an ideology that is present in much of our American experience, an ideology that correlates race with economic value. And through studying what Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor describes as the real estate industry's magical ability to turn race into profit, through the coordinated effort of builders, policymakers, bankers, and real estate professionals, we can see the intentional creation of a segregated economy in which Black Americans in particular, and by extension other marginalized groups, have had to pay a race tax in the form of paying for higher housing costs, lower standards of living, and constant exposure to physical harm. While homeownership was expanded and subsidized to create now intergenerational wealth for the white middle class through the creation of exclusive spaces. This ideology that has roots in the racialized capitalism of slavery, as well as the colonial settlement of lands that Vanessa mentioned, lands that rightfully belong to Indigenous people, continues to have the consequences that we're witnessing today in the midst of our multiple pandemics. It also continues to be conjured up in our everyday speech, such as when we say, I grew up in Riverdale versus I grew up in the Bronx. I live in Newark, or I live in Livingston, New Jersey, just a few miles away. I live and work in Morningside Heights, or I grew up in Harlem. We ask you to consider how this history is your history and part of your lived reality. And today we have an incredible program for you in which our presenters will expose how the legacies of redlining continue in our communities. But also, we believe that they will fill you with hope and possibility as they walk us through how it is possible to undesign inequity through confronting it head on and fundamentally examining what we do, the ways we relate to each other, and how we work toward change. As Mary mentioned, our program today includes panels on education, health, arts and culture, the digital and the environmental. We're going to put the program in the chat so that you can see the full day program. I want to point you to, after our first two education panels, we will have a meditation session with Harlem-based mindfulness teacher and public health professional, Vera Ruan-Tragul, who will walk us through a supportive practice to help us think about our self-preservation in the face of systemic inequality and how it shows up in our bodies. So we ask you to hang on and participate in that at 11:30. And now I will pass to Mary.
Thank you, Miriam. So let's jump into it. Again, you can read full descriptions in the and participant bios in the Undesigned Symposium program, which was linked to in the chat. Feel free to add comments and questions in the chat. There will be short Q&A following each presentation. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Undesigning the Redline in New York City Schools with the students in Chandler Miranda's Race, Space, and Urban Schools class. So take it away.
Thanks so much, Mary. Good morning. Where we live and where we go to school are inherently linked in the United States. It's impossible to imagine discussing buying a home, for some people, buying a home or moving to a neighborhood in the US without talking about the school district and the schools, often encoded in racialized way. In the culture wars that are currently raging around the country about teaching race in schools, parents often talk about their rights as property taxpayers and homeowners rather than parents or citizens. This is largely due to redlining and its legacy. Students from race, space, and urban schools are exploring the connections between the legacy of redlining and schools in New York City in this podcast series that they will release in December. Today, they're presenting their work in progress. Please welcome our student moderators, Haley and Chanel, who will guide us through a preview of the season.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the symposium. We're so glad to be here and we're excited to show you what we've done so far. So today we have several topics planned. We're going to start off with the history of redlining, especially through the lens of bilingual schooling. And then we're going to move on to 3 episodes of really focusing on school choice. The first one is going to be on pre-K for all. Then we're going to move on to specialized high schools and the SHSAT. And then we're going to see about charter schools and how they relate to school choice as well.
Hi, good morning, everyone. And as we begin to focus on schools, we're going to look specifically towards the arts programs in New York City schools and also the arts education and integration programs. In addition, we're going to focus on the discipline funding and restorative justice, specifically in District 16, and looking towards digital surveillance of students and what that might mean for schools in the future. So without further ado, the first episode on bilingual schooling.
Hi, my name is Roxy. I'm going to be presenting, and Juhi could not be here with us today.
Hi, my name is Jailin, and I'm also going to be presenting.
So our episode explores bilingual schooling. First, in the first act, we're going to be investigating the redlining history of East Harlem to provide a context for the neighborhood's demographics. Historically, East Harlem has been an immigrant enclave with a majority Hispanic and African American residents. Next, our podcast will explore the bilingual program at Manhattan Center of Science and Mathematics. We will be questioning and critiquing the curriculum of this bilingual program with firsthand accounts of students' experiences from the school.
Some of the questions that we are aiming to answer are, why are most students at Manhattan Center not from East Harlem? Why does Manhattan Center have a lower Hispanic population compared to East Newwood Middle School if they share the same building? Why only 7% of the students at Manhattan Center are English language learner if East Harlem is an immigrant neighborhood? Why does Manhattan Center bilingual program prioritize learning English before other subjects? And lastly, what are the drawbacks of these factors for students' sense of belonging to their schools, grade performance, and readiness for college and the workspace?
And then we have a 2-minute preview of the first act of our podcast in the slide.
In 1937, the Federal Housing Administration tasked the Homeowners Loan Corporation with creating residential security maps. Neighborhoods were rated on a A to D scale, with type A being the most desirable and type D being hazardous. The goal was to determine the financial security of real estate investments in residential areas across the country. This is where the term redlining was born, which was a highly discriminatory practice. A pattern emerged. Real estate. In 1937, the Federal Housing Administration tasked the Homeowners Loan Corporation with creating residential security maps. Neighborhoods were rated on a A to D scale, with type A being the most desirable and type D being hazardous. The goal was to determine the financial security of real estate investments in residential areas across the country. This is where the term redlining was born, which was a highly discriminatory practice. A pattern emerged, and neighborhoods with majority foreign-born residents or people of color were ranked type D. A real estate appraiser of the time stated that the infiltration of inharmonious racial groups tend to lower the levels of land values and to lessen the desirability of residential areas. These communities were denied loans and financial benefits, exacerbating racial inequality nationwide.
This episode will focus on the New York City neighborhood of East Harlem. The HOLC rated this a hazardous community, noting its primarily foreign-born labor working population. Throughout history, East Harlem has been a multi-ethnic enclave for Eastern European, Italian, and now Puerto Rican immigrants. Today, the neighborhood contains majority Hispanic and African American residents and is subject to one of the highest poverty and unemployment rates in the city. The long-term consequences of redlining should not be overlooked as we examine present-day East Harlem. Disinvestments in this community resulted in a declining housing market. Today, East Harlem has one of the highest concentrations of public housing complexes in New York City. Since the city's housing and school systems are interconnected, this has impacted the community's quality of education. Ultimately, this story will explore redlining's effects on school funding, segregation, and the experiences of immigrant New Yorkers in an East Harlem public school.
Thank you so much, Group 1. Now we're going to move on to our second episode. So from bilingual schools, we move into early childhood education, which forms the backbone of our education system. I'm going to pass it over to episode 2.
Hello, everyone. My name is Irene.
Hi, everyone. My name is Victoria.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Fatima, and unfortunately, our other member, Duane, couldn't make it today.
So for our podcast, we're going to be looking into the legacy of Pre-K for All, which is New York City's universal preschool program. And specifically, we're going to be assessing how accessible Pre-K for All is, particularly in terms for low income and minority students in the city. So to start our podcast, we're going to go into a bit of the history of early childhood education in the United States, and also a bit of the history of Pre-K for All, before transitioning into focusing on the impact that Pre-K for All has specifically had in School District 16, which is where we found the highest concentration of Pre-K for All sites currently. And then to end off the podcast, we're going to be looking into the future impact of the program and ask the question of if universal preschool education is the right method to bring early childhood education to our youngest children. And as you can see on your screen, there's a map of Pre-K for All sites from 2014 in relation to the demographics of the children enrolled in the program. And using this map and other sources, we're going to be looking at the rollout of universal pre-K under Mayor Bill de Blasio, and sort of assessing the accessibility, the process in which parents apply for the program, and any roadblocks or challenges we found that have developed for the program over the past few years. And just a little sneak peek of some of the research that we found. We've come to see a correlation between the poverty rates and population density, and that these are some factors that have negatively correlated with the quality of preschool programs in the city. And some other problems that we've noticed people stating in relation to preschool programs have been concerns about management on site, the competency of teachers, and overall the DOE's efforts in contributing to the overall quality of Pre-K for All programs. So now we're going to play a short clip of our podcast intro.
As you walk down the streets of New York, it's hard to miss the banners advertising what is arguably one of the city's most important education programs, Pre-K for All. What began as a simple proposal during Mayor de Blasio's 2013 mayoral campaign has, over the last 8 years, turned into a citywide initiative providing every eligible child access to free preschool education, regardless of their family's income. Before the implementation of Pre-K for All in 2014, only around 19,000 eligible students were covered by the city's preschool program. Today, that number has jumped to more than 70,000.
Full day, high quality, universal pre-K. Every child will be accepted. Every child will have a seat for free.
New York City's Pre-K for All program remains revolutionary as one of the nation's largest universal preschool programs. Numerous researchers have dived deep into the program's results, analyzing who has truly benefited from its implementation. For all the positive influence Pre-K for All has had on New York City's youngest residents, questions remain as to whether or not the program truly serves all of its participants in the same manner. In this podcast, as we dive deeper into who Pre-K for All best serves, it might even force us to wonder if universal preschool is the right way to provide early childhood education to our nation's children.
If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you.
So that was just a short snippet of our podcast, which laid the foundation for what we will focus on. And on screen, you can see two maps. On the left is the location of preschool programs in New York City in the academic year of 2021 to 2022. And on the right, you can see a redlining map from the 1930s, digitized on mapping inequality by the University of Richmond in 2016. And we actually noticed this pattern of how the D8 red line zone on the right overlaps with school district 16, which, as we mentioned, is the most concentrated with pre-K sites. And we thought that this distribution of pre-K sites aligns with the NYC DOE's goal to target underserved populations, such as low income and Black and Brown communities. And we also noticed how this economically disadvantaged families with children are also most likely to need free pre-K programs that simultaneously serve as childcare and early childhood education for their children without being financially burdened. Thank you.
Thank you, episode 2. Moving on, we're going to be focusing on specialized high schools, especially on the intersection of race and specialized high schools. So episode 3.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Talia, unfortunately, is not able to join us today, but Catherine, Bannon, and myself are extremely excited to be here and excited to talk about our project regarding specialized high schools in New York City. So specialized high schools in New York City, such as Stuyvesant, Bronx, and Brooklyn Tech, are some of New York's most prestigious high schools, and they're that way for good reason. Within many communities, they're seen as a ticket out of poverty and a necessary step towards getting into a good college, and as a result, having a high-paying good job. The accomplishments of these schools often speak for themselves. Most of these schools have numerous Nobel laureates in all sorts of different fields, and every year they graduate tons of students that end up going to Ivy League or top 20 colleges and universities. However, as you can see by this graph, a lot of these schools, or actually all of these schools, have a problem, which is that the proportion of Black and Brown students every year has been decreasing year over year over year. And this is a trend that has continued since the 1970s, as you can see on the graph. And what we found when analyzing the debate is that many of the people who are, many people blame the admissions process that these schools rely on, which is a student score on a singular test, the SHSAT, or the specialized high school admissions test. And what we wanted to analyze is specifically how does this racialize, or how does this environment create such massive racial disparities? How does this happen? And why does this happen? And what we wanted to specifically look at is answering these questions through the lens of the people that went to these specialized high schools and the people that also work in the testing industry that a lot of students rely on in order to prepare for these exams. And with that, I'll pass this on to Bannon.
Yeah, thank you, Oliver. As he mentioned, admissions to 8 of New York's 9 specialized high schools is solely based on the results of one standardized test called the SHSAT. The test consisted of 114 questions divided into one section for math and another section called ELA, or English Language Arts. To investigate the impact of this process, we interviewed a student who went through it. So this is a brief clip from our conversation with Radia, who is a 2021 graduate of Bronx Science High School and a current first-year student at Binghamton University.
The public schools, from my friends who lived in the Bronx, they were saying how it wasn't a lot of funding for to have specific programs. Not a lot of teachers told students about the SHSAT until like a month before the SHSAT. So there was just not a lack of knowledge about the SHSAT. So it was definitely like certain communities, based on the lack of funding or based on the lack of knowledge being given to them, that there was a different culture of like knowing about the SHSAT and studying for it.
So as Radia noticed in conversations with her peers, students across the city have highly varied levels of access to training for the SHSAT. Some students are taught in preparation for months or even years in advance. It's taken in 8th grade. And of New York's approximately 80,000 8th grade students, only about 28,000 per year sit for the SHSAT. And within that group, only about 5,000 receive offers of admission, according to NewYorkCity.gov. So who makes up that 5,000 is highly determined by access to in-school test prep, private tutoring, and other resources that make the enrollment populations look very different from the city as a whole. And with that, I will pass it on to Catherine.
Thanks, Bannon. So part of our podcast is also dedicated to the middle schools that feed into these specialized high schools, which is especially relevant to redlining, since unlike how specialized high schools draw from all over the city, middle schools theoretically reflect the surrounding neighborhood better. So looking at Brooklyn School IS 187, which is pointed out with the blue arrow on the map, 75% of the 251 students who took the SHSAT in 2017 received an offer, making it both the highest percentage and the highest number of students admitted from a single middle school. Looking at the neighborhood, this neighborhood was redlined due to its large Italian population, but in the 1980s, the population began to shift due to an influx of Jewish families. Nowadays, Borough Park is 72% white, but IS 187 is actually 72% Asian, as determined through the school application process for what students attend that school. So what does this mean? Well, IS 187 is part of a larger pattern. We've noticed that at these kinds of competitive schools, whether it be at the middle or high school level, they don't typically reflect the surrounding neighborhood because of the application process that begins even so early on. And this also shows how rapid neighborhood change over time can kind of complicate the connection between redlining, disinvestment, and school composition.
Thank you, episode 3. So moving from specialized high schools, episode 4 focuses on the segregated narratives of choice regarding public schools in New York City, specifically in District 9 in the Bronx. I'm going to pass it over to episode 4.
Hi, my name is Paulyn.
Hi, my name is Nori.
Good morning, my name is Lila, and our group member Fatu is not able to be here today, but we are going to do our best. Okay, so could you click on the link, please? Thank you. So our podcast is about redlining in the Bronx and how it relates to school choice. And our group member Fatu, who is not here, you can stay right there. Thank you. Our group member Fatu, who is not here, went to Bronx Prep High School in the Bronx, which is a charter school. And so we'll be outlining the historical and geographic narratives that created that school throughout this presentation. So below you can see a map of just some of the charter schools in the Bronx. And if you scroll a little bit further, there is an HOLC redlining map from 1938 of the Bronx, which categorizes some of the areas in yellow as definitely declining and the other areas, which are painted in red, as hazardous. And then if you scroll a little bit further, we have a demographic comparison of the Bronx in 1940 compared to the Bronx in 2019. And it's important to note that in 2019, the demographics are just from one zip code within the Bronx, which is Fatu's zip code where her school was in, whereas the 1940 demographics are of the entire Bronx. So they're not completely perfect comparisons. But one thing that's helpful to note is that the Bronx shifted from a 65% white population to a majority Black and Hispanic population. And if you scroll back up a little bit, thank you so much, and a little bit more, it's helpful to notice that a lot of the distribution of these charter schools are located in the areas that were redlined and marked as hazardous in the 1940s. And so these historic notions of community and of safety still impact residential segregation and therefore educational opportunity today. disenfranchising low-income and Black and Brown communities and the schools that they have access to. So if you could scroll further down, as I said, I'm Lila, and I went to Montgomery Blair High School, which was a public school, but I applied to a magnet. So I implemented choice when I chose my high school. And giving it to Paulyn.
Hi, my name is Paulyn, and I went to a charter school called North Star Academy in Newark, New Jersey.
Hi, I'm Nori. I went to a private school in Baltimore, Maryland. It was in the suburbs outside of the city in a neighborhood that was categorized historically as blue and green.
And our group member, Fatu, who isn't here, went to Bronx Prep, which is the school that we are focusing our podcast on. And like Lila just mentioned, we all exercised choice when deciding what school we wanted to go to. So now if you can scroll down, we will move on to defining choice in education. And marketization is the idea that schools exist in a marketplace and position families as consumers in that marketplace. School choice is defined and refers to attempts to increase the power of the parents and their students to choose a school and education that best fits and serves them. And a charter school is defined as a publicly funded but independently operated school established by a charter between the body granting the charter, which is usually a local or national authority, and the independent body that operates the school. And finally, charter chains are when multiple charter schools are managed by one independent board and CEO. So now we will transition to presenting the history of Bronx Prep.
So zooming into Fatu's old school and the history of that one school, the charter school, from 1999 to 2000, Bronx Prep was founded by a nice and well-intentioned-ish white lady named Kristen Kearns Jordan, who enlisted her social and political capital along with other majority white and wealthy friends to fund the construction of the charter. Next slide, please. There's an arrow on the right of the screen. Yes, thank you so much. So this was part of a larger tradition of wealthy white individuals entering from outside majority Black and Brown low-income neighborhoods and imposing their notions of what those communities need in their education. These charters took funding away from the neighborhood public schools and were crafted upon racialized ideologies of control and preparation for people of color in America. Once built, Bronx Prep continued to be governed and decided by an external body made up of majority white and wealthy constituents, not at all reflecting the community of the school or their legitimate interests. Kristen Kearns Jordan remained the head of this group called the Board of Trustees until 10 years after the school's founding. Could you do the next two slides, please? Click that arrow twice for me, please. Thank you very much. So then 10 years after the school's founding, she left and abandoned the school, and it began to go down in performance. Organization and even the school structure itself diminished and teachers left, which inevitably reflected on the students' performance themselves as value. And this is just by evaluating solely test scores, because they remain the dominant determinant of a school or student body's almost worth to the state. This was also part of a grander theme happening with charters in low-income neighborhoods, as their wealthy white founders would leave and abandon them for other pursuits or just for rest, because they had that option. Bronx Prep was at risk of closing for failure to realize its charter, or the charter is the promise that it makes to the Board of Education that their students would receive test scores on the regents, the state tests, 15% higher than students in public schools of the surrounding area. Again, fulfilling the tradition, the board of trustees, without the say or even knowledge or acknowledgement of anyone in and around the school, said that they would shop Bronx Prep around to the growing charter management organizations. This is when, in 2014, corporate type showed up alongside board members at the school's doors, telling faculty that they'd have to reapply for their jobs because school governance would be permanently transitioning over to democracy prep the next year. And you can click the right arrow twice now again. Students engaged in small acts of rebellion against this news and expressed anger and frustration towards the sudden selling and commandeering of their school spaces. But nevertheless, democracy prep took over. You can click the right arrow once again. and has governed Bronx Prep ever since, while still keeping a lot of the school's original principles, such as emphasis on strict discipline, college acceptance, and excellent test taking.
If you could keep scrolling, thank you. Yes, and keep scrolling a little bit further down.
Yeah, so just under the slideshow.
Thank you. And I'll give this to Paulyn.
The history of Bronx Prep is obviously one that has a long pattern of external policing and control over low-income neighborhoods of color, and historic redlining seen in the Bronx inevitably caused housing and education inequality, weakening public schools, and allowing charter chains to establish dominance. This is the end of our presentation, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Episode 4. Now we're going to shift focus from charter schools and school choice, and we're going to talk about the arts education programs in New York City schools. So episode 5, take it away.
Hi, I'm Sydney.
Hi, I'm Connie.
And today we're going to be talking about arts education in New York City schools and how it relates to the history of redlining. So first we wanted to start, next slide, please. So first we wanted to just propose 2 questions that we are exploring in our podcast. One, what is the impact that redlining has had on the availability of arts education programs, specifically in District 3 of New York City public schools? And how do schools with limited arts funding provide arts opportunities for students during the time of the pandemic? We will be addressing more of the first question in this session today, but in our podcast, we'll be exploring both. Next slide. So here we have a series of maps. 2 of them are from Mapping Inequality database and showing sort of the redlining and the zones of PS 145, which is the school that we are looking at in our podcast, and of Manhattan. And then next to it, we have a map from niche schools of the best performing arts high schools in the city. So arts education has never has one section of curriculum or field of study been more inconsistent and wrought with funding issues in the history of public schools. This is despite studies demonstrating the positive correlation of arts education with higher grad rates, positive mental health reports, and long-lasting impacts on socio-emotional skills. And the legacy of redlining has undoubtedly affected access to education and distribution of funding to public schools, and this can especially be seen in the distribution of arts programs, as they are more often seen as a luxury rather than a necessity in school curriculums. In this episode, we link the past with the present and try to understand how redlining has affected funding and access to arts in public schools, as well as how the pandemic may have presented new challenges as well as unexpected solutions to bridging the arts education gap. So as you can see, there is a parallel between sort of the zones on the redlining map and the concentration of the best arts schools and arts programs in the city in public schools. And as you can see, the district where PS 145 is located is a historically C class or declining yellow zone, and nowadays exists between public housing projects and luxury apartments. We will talk later about how this unique positioning makes the school both a diverse and interesting community, but has also restricted its access to resources to arts education. Next slide.
Many schools rely on partnerships with nonprofit organizations across New York City to provide adequate music and visual arts programming for students. Most are free to students, but some enrichment programming does include a cost for participation. When it comes to arts education as a part of the school's daily curriculum, many schools in District 3 and across the New York City public school system fall behind. And today we'll focus on the partnership between PS 145 and Musical Mentors Collaborative, which is founded at Columbia University. So PS 145 is a school that's located around like 15 minutes walk away from Columbia. And the school really emphasizes confidence and self-esteem as a crucial part for academic success. And the arts programs offered by the schools include weekly dance lessons that's open for everyone and is included in the curriculum, and in addition to that, the school has partnered with Musical Mentors Collaborative and Studio in the School for music lessons and visual art. Next slide. Thank you. And today we'll focus on Musical Mentors Collaborative. And it is established in 2009 by a group of students at Columbia and is now become a nonprofit organization. Today, it has 2 university chapters and 5 partner schools. What does it do? It offers free one-on-one music instructions in person or on Zoom. The students in these programs are primarily from under-resourced backgrounds and Title I schools. MMC is also working with homeless shelters and supportive housing programs to put instruments in the hands of their kids. And all the instructors are university students with extensive musical training. When we think about the limitations of this kind of partnership model for musical learning opportunities, there are a few things that came into our minds. The first one is location. Most of the partner schools are in proximity with a university that's in the network of the Musical Mentors Collaborative. And also the offering is very limited. The students only have around 30 minutes instruction a week. There are no opportunities to play with other students. And also parents have to be present for the lessons, which would encounter a series of scheduling issues. There are also other accessibility challenges such as cost. Some programs through partnerships are not free. And language. Parents who have limited English proficiency may find it difficult to participate in these programs.
Yes, but however many limitations these programs may have, they are working to help undesign the Redline when it comes to access to arts educations in historically underfunded school zones and communities.
Thank you, episode 5. Episode 6 will focus on arts education in the Arts and Letters School in District 13, whose new merger with PS305 is being used as an integration plan to combat the history of redlining and segregated schools in the district. Thank you, episode 6.
Hi, I'm Sofia.
And I'm Isabel.
Our podcast episode focuses on a school in District 13 called Arts and Letters 305 United. In the podcast, we go through the recent history of the school, specifically focusing on its recent formation in 2020 and how it was birthed from a parent-led integration plan.
Before we get into how Arts and Letters United was born, let's start with what it looks like now. And if our hosts could go to the next slide and play the 2 videos, that would be great. Okay, Arts and Letters United is located in Bed-Stuy. Our group went to visit the school during the New York Marathon when the PTA was hosting a bake sale along the race route. At the event, it was clear how tight-knit the Arts and Letters community was. It was diverse, and to paint a picture for you all, conversations in the host's brownstone were sometimes in Spanish, and parents chatted about their children in Canada Goose jackets.
Now we can move on to our story map, which will be linked on the slide. Awesome. When it was first created, Arts and Letters was an unzoned arts-focused school. Let's start exploring. Thank you. The curriculum at Arts and Letters incorporated the arts into every student's daily learning, and in contrast to other high-performing schools, pushed test prep to the side to focus instead on student voices.
Arts and Letters was a choice school, sharing a building with another public school in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. For context, a choice school is a school without certain barriers to entry that zone schools have, like having to live in the neighborhood. Often, wealthy parents benefit the most from this.
Arts and letters was incredibly popular among these upper middle class families and rose in the ranks of the best schools in Brooklyn. Not surprisingly, white students were in the majority. The school was 60% non-white, which is a grouping that includes Black, Hispanic, and Asian students. So when you break it down, 40% white is more than any other racial grouping at the school. However, Fort Greene is a historically redline neighborhood and as a result is only 28% white. Despite the school's popularity, it did not represent its local families. This became a problem. Simultaneously, arts and letters began to outgrow their building. They needed a plan to solve both of these problems at once. We can move forward to the next page now.
Okay, great. At the same time, PS 305 in Bed-Stuy was under-enrolled. According to the DOE, the school had just over 100 students in grades K through 8. Arts and letters had over 500. Though Bed-Stuy was a redline district that was quickly becoming gentrified, families who moved in often sent their students to other schools. And we can go on to the last page now.
Now, how do we get from these two separate schools to Arts and Letters 305 United? An integration plan. Parents from both schools got together to propose a plan that would merge the schools to the CEC. With 500 signatures, the plan passed.
And while this merger seemed like the perfect place because it fixed both schools' enrollment problems and attempted to combat school segregation caused by redlining in the district, not all reactions were positive.
Prior to the merger, families and parents were able to see the possible ways in which this plan could turn PS 305 into a school for the wealthy white kids coming from arts and letters. There seemed to be fear that the overall identity of PS 305 would change.
The enrollment policy at Arts and Letters United did not change much from the Academy of Arts and Letters. Parents noted that the school planned on maintaining the lottery enrollment to prior enrollment ratio that Arts and Letters had in the past. 60% of the spots were going to continue to be up for lottery or choice enrollment. This meant that students in PS 305's previous catchment area might not be guaranteed a place in the school. This could maintain the majority white student population that Arts and Letters had before the merger.
Overall, families at PS 305 seemed to be under the impression that the merger was just a plan to erase 305.
Yeah, but this is just the beginning of Arts and Letters 305 United's story and our podcast. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, episode 6. Now we're going to focus, this is actually Haley and my group, on discipline funding and restorative justice. And Arinma and Monique could not be here with us today, so we're just going to. All right, so our podcast focuses on the issue of discipline as it pertains to the Boys and Girls School, which is a public high school that is located in District 16, serving the Brooklyn neighborhood of Bed-Stuy. We're going to explore the history and the current role of redlining and policing in Bed-Stuy in order to ultimately present restorative justice as a potential path to rectifying past discriminatory practices that left Black and Brown District 16 students disproportionately disenfranchised.
So to open up our presentation, we wanted to provide you all with like a brief overview of the topics of policing and discipline as they pertain to New York City schools, but specifically those in Brooklyn. From the 1920s to the 1940s, the city largely viewed discipline as a problem of delinquency that could be fought through adjusted curriculums and police academy courses that would be offered to educators. It is during the late 60s that we see the NYC DOE group New York City schools into districts, and affluent neighborhoods began to protest against transferring of students from overcrowded violent schools. As a result of these protests, 1,000 police officers were stationed in Brooklyn neighborhood schools, resulting in more protests. Under Mayor Koch in the 80s, New York City schools saw discipline codes for the first time, and metal detectors were installed in Brooklyn high schools. To give you an idea of the scope and reach of discipline in New York City schools at the time, in 1994, the New York Board of Education's Division of School Safety would have been considered the nation's 9th largest police department with 3,200 officers and a $73 million budget. The reach of militarization was only further solidified when Mayor Giuliani authorized the NYPD to take further control of school security in 1998, thus initiating what has been 2 decades of police presence in schools that has cascaded into the consistent and disproportionate interactions with the justice system for Black and Brown students in Brooklyn and across the city.
And specifically in District 16, in the Boys and Girls School, there have been historically more suspensions compared to other schools. The superintendent suspensions in 2017 to 18. And if we look at this chart right here, this is the data of the amount of suspensions given at the Boys and Girls Schools. And this is our a little overview from our teammate Arinma. So I'm just gonna play this here.
While the disciplinary landscape of Boys and Girls High School and New York City public schools at large is punishment oriented and produces student outcomes such as the ones we've outlined here, looking to the future, restorative justice seems to be the way forward. As the 2019 New York City Department of Education established that in cases of all superintendent suspensions, schools must hold a welcome back restorative circle before a student returns to school from a suspension. These circles will provide space for students, parents, and school staff to create a plan to help a student transition back to school. Initiatives such as these, in combination with the efforts of co-curricular organizations, work to rectify generational damage produced by redlining.
So here, the Advocates for Children of New York, so AAFC, this exists in service to protect every child's right to an education. And this focuses on students mostly from low-income backgrounds who are experiencing discrimination of any kind. And most notably, AFC brought forward a class action lawsuit against Boys and Girls High School principal Frank Mickens. And in this preliminary statement that we're planning to use in our podcast is that this is a class action brought on behalf of former and current students of Boys and Girls High School. So boys and girls who claim that they have been illegally excluded and denied their right to an education, collectively excluded in violation of the US Constitution, federal law, and New York state law.
So to finish off, we really wanted to talk about the connection between redlining and restorative justice. So the use of restorative justice both inside and outside of schools can help to rectify some of these issues related to redlining. And through centering the community, it's a way of remedying the harm done by the constant over-policing and hyper-surveillance within redline communities and redline schools to help restore them. And inherent to restorative justice is the acknowledgement that our past is constantly impacting our present. So we need to work to account for the generational impact of redlining. And now putting my hosting hat back on, I'm going to pass it over to our final episode, which is episode 8. So we're going to talk about digital surveillance, which is the next frontier of policing in schools that encloses, controls, limits, oppresses, and marginalizes students of color.
Hi, I'm Frankie.
I'm Rakika. Good morning.
Good morning, I'm Noreen.
Could we go to the next slide? We have our story map. Okay, so the next frontier. So Lockport City School District became the first known public school district in New York to use facial recognition and one of the first in the nation. The plan to install facial recognition was 2 years in the making and was announced in March of 2018. The district spent $1.4 million of the money they had been awarded by the state to install 300 cameras. The purpose of the cameras were to detect faces that were on a list of persons of interest, which was devised by school administrators. The technology also was used to look for guns. When a gun was detected, they would call the police department. When an individual was detected, they would call personnel, security personnel. Could you go to the next slide? So
People in favor of facial recognition said that it could potentially prevent mass shootings as well as prevent sexual predators from entering school buildings. Can you go to the next slide?
So there was a lot of opposition to using facial recognition in schools because of privacy and also racial bias. A lot of these facial recognition algorithms are often trained on white faces, and so they can't discern people of color's faces as well. And that leads to a lot of misidentification. And that's just another way to surveil students of color. And while this type of algorithm may benefit white students, it would be at the expense of students of color. And so in June 2020, the New York Civil Liberties Union sued the New York State Education Department to under data privacy laws to prevent this recognition software from being used in schools. Go to the next slide, please. And then on December 22nd, 2020, Governor Andrew Cuomo signed into law a moratorium on biometric surveillance tools, and this included facial recognition software. And so this was to protect students and student privacy from being subject to this type of surveillance in schools, and by to prevent them from being victims of the racial biases that may be present because of using these algorithms. Go to the next slide.
So this ban was rendered futile and obsolete by the coronavirus pandemic, which enabled schools to bring this issue very close to home, quite literally, because COVID allowed schools to bypass, but more importantly, intensified the digital surveillance of students through online learning. What was supposed to be a safe alternative for students to continue with their academia and socialize with their peers quickly transformed into a hub for surveillance. So due to a lot of murky privacy laws, a lot of students felt anxious to be put on camera or put their family on camera because they risk deportation, which is something that we should definitely not, invalidate that feeling at whatsoever. So how exactly did the New York City School Administration specifically contribute to the infringement of these rights? You just have to take a look at their contract with GoGuardian, but you won't find a lot online because it really is that suspicious and shady. So to give some preface, GoGuardian is a software company that allows schools to track students and monitor their activity online at a very microscopic level by teachers. So this quasi spyware analyzes more than 23 million students and their digital activity. And the DOE signed a deal with the corporation during a pandemic that caused all New York City students to rely on laptops and computers. More importantly, this deal was made after the ban that Noreen was just talking about that Governor Cuomo signed. And on GoGuardian's website, you'll find a really cryptic message saying, "We're in classrooms just like yours," with the New York City DOE's logo right below it. And so the most ironic detail is that the DOE banned schools from using Zoom from after establishing multiple cracks in the security system way back in April of 2020. But then lifted the ban right after just 1 month, only to shake hands with such an invasive company like GoGuardian. Next slide. This would be the case if technology was even accessible to their homes, which leads us to our next problem, the digital divide and digital redlining. Digital redlining is a systemic denial of resources like internet access. And so at the start of the pandemic, more than 500,000 households in New York City did not have any internet access. And so what did the DOE do to address this? They made a $269 million deal with Apple, IBM, and T-Mobile and bought 500,000 iPads to give out to students. But there was a shortcoming. As of March of this year, over 20,000 requests for the tablets were still under review, and 16,000 of these requests can date back to 2020. So with that being said, we'll play a snippet of our Act 3 on the slide, on the undesign slide.
Two years ago, New York City students protested against the use of security cameras in classrooms. Students of all ages in the city have ideas on how to limit digital surveillance in schools and how to increase educational equality. It's important that we listen.
When we think about larger ways to make education more equitable, we first need to acknowledge that education isn't the sole problem in society. is part of a larger mechanism of interdependent institutions that systematically deny people of color and other marginalized communities resources and opportunities.
Education sometimes serves as a scapegoat for so many of the problems in society. However, with this acknowledgement, we must also recognize that schools don't just perpetuate inequities. They are embedded in the larger structures of reinforcing them. Schools are part of the mechanism of domination. Schools have caused and exacerbated social and academic stratification, as well as the prioritization of punishment over personal development. Schools are responsible for the bearing and bolstering of false histories, and as a result, the exclusion of students of color. Ultimately, schools are responsible for dreams that have been deferred.
So we ask again, what now?
That was the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, students. Thank you, students, so much for presenting your works in progress. It is incredible to see how much work you've done over the semester and the connections that you've made between where we go to school and where we live. There is one question in the chat. Thank you, Terrence. And I'll go ahead and answer this. One of the things that we talk about in this class is that we really try not to look at teachers and students and parents from a deficit perspective, because we know that there are larger structures and systems at play that determine how teachers are able to teach, what choices parents are able to make, and often these are deformed choices. And so while this is a really important question, it's not one that we answer in this class because we are more interested in those larger structures at play. If anyone, the podcast will be available in December. It'll be posted to my Twitter feed. We haven't determined exactly where else it will go, but we'll try to link it to this website as well. If you have follow-up questions, please, for the students or for me, please email me at cmiranda@barnard.edu. And I believe I'll put my Twitter handle in the chat as well, so you can look for the release of the podcast in mid-December. Thank you all for giving us your time so graciously, and a big congratulations to the students for all their hard work.